persistence context collision in Jakarta persistence. Here you can see persistent context collision. Only one persistent context could be propagated with Jakarta persistent Jakarta transaction. The extent persistent context would always try to make itself an active persistent context. This can lead to situations which of the two persistent contexts collide with each other. Consider, for example, that a stateless session bean with the transaction scoped entity manager creates a new persistent context. Then invokes a method on the stateful session bean with the extended persistent context. During the eager associations of the extended persistent context, the container will check to see whether there is already an active persistent context. If there is, it must be the same as the extended persistent context that is trying to associate, or an exception will be thrown. In this example, the stateful session bean will find the transaction scoped persistent context created by the stateless session bean, and the call into the stateful session bean method will fail. There can only one active persistent context for the transaction. This figure illustrates this case. While extended persistent context propagation is useful if a stateful session bean with an extended persistent context is the first enterprise bean to be invoked in a call chain, it limits the situation in which the other components that can call into the stateful session bean if they are also using the entity managers. This might or might not be a common depending on your application architecture, but it is something to keep in mind when planning dependencies between components. One way to work around this problem is to change the default transaction attribute for stateful session bean that uses the extended persistent context. If the default transaction attribute requires new, any active transaction will be suspended before the stateful session bean method starts, allowing it to associate its extended persistent context with the new transaction. This is a good strategy if the stateful session bean calls into other stateless session beans that needs to propagate to the persistent context. Note that excessive use of requires new transaction attribute can lead to application performance problems because many more transactions than normal will be created and the active transaction will be suspended and resumed. If the stateful session bean is largely self-contained, that is, it does not call other session beans and does not need its persistent context propagated, the default transaction attribute of not supported can be worth considering. In this case, any active transaction will be suspended before stateful session bean method start, but two new transaction will be started. If there are some methods that need to write data to the database, those methods can be overridden to use requires new transaction attributes. Here you can see a stateless session bean transaction stateless session bean is connected to stateful session bean via invokes and transaction propagated. Here status session bean interacts with transaction scope persistent context, and here stateful session bean interacts with extended persistence context. Here you can see the collision here. Now this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for watching it.